Cool. All right, we're back with the kind of second video in this series, and we're going to talk about how to kind of think about AI agents for accounting. And so what I want to kind of talk about here, I'm going to kind of steal from, or maybe inspired by, a YouTube channel called Indie Dev Dan. So I highly recommend checking out his channel. He does more kind of programming with, not just with Claude Code, but all the kind of different AI programming tools. But really solid videos, amazing production and thoughts and everything. So one of the things that he's said that I think has kind of gained some popularity, I'm not sure if he's the original author of it, but when you think about building things with AI, you need to think about the core four. So, and that is the model, the context, the tools, and the prompts. So model being, in this case, Opus 4.5. If you're using ChatGPT, you're probably using 5.2 right now. If you're using Gemini, you're probably using Gemini 3, I think is what it's called. I can't remember, but you know what I mean. So whatever the model is, that's the model in the context of the four. The other one is tools, and so tools is like the action verb of how the AI does what you need it to do. So does it have a tool that can read your emails? Some of the basic tools that Claude Code comes with is being able to read PDFs, for example, being able to edit files. Those are all tools. Maybe some more of the kind of tools that you hear about a lot about is like, MCP tools where, an AI agent can go and connect to the system and read data from that system, right? So kind of the action verbs, again, like how your AI agent does stuff. Context, and this is what I'm going to actually start talking about here with first, but context is the knowledge base that the AI kind of draws upon, like the foundational knowledge you give it. If you think about, yourself as a professional, your context is your education, it's your work experience, it's things you've learned on the job, right? That all kind of fills into how you do your role. And, if there's problems that need solving, you kind of fall back on that context that you have to solve those problems, right? And so with Claude Code, you can give it that kind of context. And they do it's a really cool way that they do it. I'm a big fan of that approach that they use, which we'll get into. And then the last one is prompting. And prompting is one that I actually was not as, I didn't think it was as important if you had a really smart model. But that was a bit more, if you're thinking about like ChatGPT, just using it on the browser or using it on the desktop, like just the chat interface. But when you actually want it to do work for you and you're going to delegate, delegate tasks to this AI agent, then the prompting becomes really important. And, in just doing some experimentation with this kind of stuff over the last couple of weeks, prompting is probably the area I spend the most time on between all the other three that are on that core four. Because you need to be really intentional about, what you want to do, what you're trying to do, how you want to achieve that. You need to give those instructions to the AI. And it's kind of funny, I wouldn't have guessed, prior to having to do this exercise that like writing out what you do and how you do it is like that difficult. And I wouldn't say it's difficult, but you have to think about it more than, you probably would just kind of take for granted, what your brain knows. And again, all the schooling and all the work experience that you have. So that's context, or that's prompting of the four. So let's go ahead and start with context again, because I think that's one that we can really easily kind of talk about. So I'm going to actually get back into Claude here. I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. And so now I'm back in Claude. Model's really easy. I guess let's start with model. Model, you can change it. If you're using Claude Code, you can just go into / or / and hit model and change it to whatever you need. Claude Code is not the only AI CLI interface. There's Codex from OpenAI, which I hear is really solid. There's Open Code, which is more of like an open source one, where you can actually use different models. You can use, GPT 5.2. You can use, Gemini. So there's lots of different CLI tools, but for now and for this video, I'm kind of keeping it Claude Code focused because that's definitely the flagship CLI tool right now. So so here's the model, and then let's get into context. So the way that I'm going to look at context or think about context is via a claude.md file. So first, if you're not familiar with what an MD file is, it's a markdown file. And it's basically just text that can be rendered a certain way when it's in a browser. I wouldn't worry much more than that about knowing what it is. It's just basically text. If you have a notepad, you can open up these files and just kind of see, okay, yeah, that's a text file. So I'm going to open it up here, this Claude.md file, and this is going to kind of serve as the agent's context. So you can see here I'm saying, hey, your name is Emmy, you're my personal assistant. Emmy's the name of my dog who passed away a few years ago, amazing dog. So named Claude Code in her honor. And then I would just say the rest of the stuff you can kind of ignore, but except for this section down here, because this is kind of more like the context that is specific for kind of accounting. And when I was kind of workshopping this, what I kind of thought about was a job description. So when you're hiring for an accounting role, you typically have like a set of areas that you need someone to manage. You know, need someone to post entries for. You need someone to do reconciliations for. So let's just say it's prepaid expenses and hedging and cash. You know, you'll make a job description. You say, you know, this is the company that we are. We need this level of role. This person's going to cover these areas. And in order to be effective in these areas, these are the skills you need to have. And that's kind of like what we're trying to do with the context on this Claude.md file. I would probably add maybe the skills section here, or I do have the skills section here. I forgot I did that. So, you know, I say when you perform reconciliations, please use the reconciliation skill. So I kind of tried to model this section after like a job description. And then you can see here like communication preferences. I said, hey, be brief and succinct. Don't give me all the, you know, fluffy AI stuff. So that's the context. You can make this however you want. You know, when I was first starting out with Claude Code, I had it speak to me like a pirate, and I just kind of said, speak to me like a seafaring pirate, and it did it. So, which of course it did, but I don't know why I chose that, but that's what I chose. So, you know, if I go here and I say, you know, what is your name? It's going to tell me it's Emmy, and then you know, what is your purpose? If you've seen the Holy Grail movie, you might be catching on a reference there. Amazing movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But yeah, so here it goes. You know, here's my journal entries. This is what I do. Blah blah blah. So we've given it context already. That's simple, right? So you just make a Claude.md file, give it context that you want to have it know, and then you know, it has that context. Pretty easy. So aside from that context, there's also, you know, a level of customization that you can do in Claude, which I'm not going to get into all in this video, but you know, you have agents which can kind of have their own set of skills and their own kind of set of context. So I'll kind of show the context here for this mortgage research agent. So let me go into this folder here, and you can see it has a skills.md folder. So basically it kind of says, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. You know, I have like an RSS feed that I run, and it basically takes the last whatever hours I asked for, and goes to that RSS feed and gets the articles that were posted in that time, and then summarizes it with kind of a mortgage accounting considerations. So that's a cool little feature, really easy to make in Claude Code. I also have a personal site, because I have a personal site that I run, that I keep up. And I don't think I have anything in here, actually. I think it's in a different directory. So kind of funny. I need to move it over here. But you can kind of give it, if you wanted to give certain context to Claude Code, but not the top level context, this would be where you make an agent and then you make a Claude.md file, and that kind of serves as that subagent's context. And I would say that subagents can get pretty complicated. I still think a lot of times you probably don't need a subagent because these context windows are so large. Like if I go here and I do context, you can see that like we have a lot of empty squares, and we haven't done anything yet, but like that's kind of what that's showing. And so, you know, you want to be thoughtful about how you manage context, but you also don't want a bunch of, again, Russian kind of nesting dolls where you have subagents that have their own, you know, subdirectories that are 2 or 3 levels deep. I think just from what I've heard and from my own experience that it kind of starts to not get as consistent that way. So one other thing I want to kind of mention one more time in this video, and then we'll wrap it for this video, is I had this line here that says uses progressive disclosure. And that's a term, I'll close out of this, that's a term that is relevant, again, to managing context in, you know, AI, where there is a finite amount of, you know, tokens that they can handle. And again, that goes back to this piece here, this kind of system memory. I'm looking on my other screen here. If I had loaded every single text file that is in this directory when Claude spins up, you'd immediately get chunked up a bunch from all that information that it knows. And it's great, it knows all that information, but like if you're not asking it questions about some of those folders or some of those files, then you're really just wasting space and wasting memory. And these agents are really good. You may not run into that issue, but if you have really large code bases, or if you have really large files, many files, you're going to run into that issue. And so progressive disclosure is basically a smart way to think about, like, you only load that context when you go into that directory. And so that's kind of how that works. So cool. So we'll leave it there. So we covered model, covered context. We'll go over skills and prompts in the next video. And then from there, I'll probably do a separate video on like a demo for doing accounting reconciliations. So cool. Hope you like that one. And yeah, see you in the next one. Thanks, everybody.